In the depths of the unknown, where shadows whisper and fear takes form, welcome to Classic Storytime Hub, the place where classic horror and mystery come alive. Tonight, I bring you a reimagined version of The Dark Eidolon by Clark Ashton Smith, retold with a suspenseful narrative style that grips the soul and breathes new life into this haunting tale. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the shadows.
On Gothic, the last continent of a dying earth, the sun no longer blazed with youthful fire. Its light was dim, stained as though veiled by a mist of blood. Across the heavens, countless new stars had awakened, and the shadows of infinity pressed ever closer. From those shadows, the forgotten gods returned, ancient deities once worshipped in Hyperborea, in Mu, in Poseidonus, bearing new names, yet the same dreadful powers. And with them came the elder demons, drawn by the stench of sacrifice, eager to rekindle the primordial sorceries of mankind. In this twilight age, necromancers and magicians thrived. Their dark deeds whispered in every corner of Gothic. Yet none surpassed Namira, whose sorcery bent the proud cities of Silac beneath his will. In his fevered arrogance, he dared to see himself as the equal of Thassidon, lord of evil itself. Namira made his stronghold in Immerse, the capital of Silac. He had come from the desert realm of Tasun, trailing behind him a storm of dread reputation. None suspected that in returning to Immerse, he had come back to the city of his birth. For all believed him a son of Tasun. None could have imagined that this master of black arts was once Narthos, a ragged beggar boy of uncertain blood who had scrounged for scraps in the bazaars of Immerse. Alone, despised and starving, he had nursed in silence a hatred for the cruel, glittering city, a hatred that smoldered like a hidden ember, waiting for the day it would ignite into a firestorm to consume all.
From his earliest years, Narthos carried a burning rancor against mankind. That hatred deepened the day young Prince Zotula, scarcely older than he, rode through the palace square on a restless steed. Begging for a coin, Narthos was met not with mercy, but with scorn. Zotula spurred his horse forward, trampling the beggar boy beneath its hooves. Broken and near death, Narthos lay abandoned for hours as the crowd passed him by. When at last he crawled back to his hovel, he bore forever a limp and the scar of a hoof branded into his flesh. Forgotten by Eumaeus, he wandered south into the deserts of Tasun, where death nearly claimed him. But at a lonely oasis, he found the hermit sorcerer Ophalok, who saw in the starving boy a dark potential. Under Ophalok's tutelage, Narthos drank forbidden wines not of earthly grapes, ate fruits that had never known soil or water, and mastered the lore of demons. In time, he forged his own pact with Poseidon, lord of evil. When Ophalok died, the boy shed his old name and arose anew as Namira, a sorcerer feared among the wandering tribes and the tomb-haunted wastes of Tasun. Yet the wound of his youth never healed. Year by year, he wove in silence the black web of vengeance against Zotula. His fame spread like a plague, whispered in Yoros, dreaded in Zulbashair, where the god Mordigion feasts on the dead. Long before he returned, the people of Eumaeus already knew his name as a scourge more terrible than pestilence or desert storm. Meanwhile, fate turned its wheel. Pithame, Zotula's father, perished from the bite of a serpent that crept into his bed one autumn night. Some whispered that Zotula himself had placed it there, though none could prove it. With his father gone, Zotula ascended the throne of Xylac. He ruled with cruelty and indolence, drowning in strange luxuries, and the people, corrupt as their emperor, cheered his depravity. Heaven and hell alike withheld their hand, and so he prospered. And above Xylac, the red suns and ashen moons drifted westward, sinking into the seldom-sailed sea that, if the sailors' tales were true, poured forever past the Isle of Na'at and cascaded into the abyss at the world's edge.
Zotula's excesses grew ever more grotesque, his sins swelling like poisoned fruit that hung above a bottomless abyss. Yet time's winds blew gently, and the fruit did not fall. Surrounded by fools, eunuchs, and concubines, Zotula laughed, his name carried far across the lands, not only for his debaucheries, but as a rival wonder to the dread sorceries of Namira. Then came the year of the hyena, in the burning month of the star Canucle. Zotula proclaimed a feast for all Umayos. Tables groaned beneath meats steeped in rare spices from the Isle of Sotar. The wines of Yoros and Zilak, fiery as molten rock, flowed without end from vast urns. The people drank, and madness seized them, a frenzy of laughter, a delirium of joy, and afterward the wine dragged them into a slumber as deep as the Lethe of the tomb. One by one they collapsed in streets, gardens, and halls, as though a plague had swept the city. In his golden banquet chamber, Zotula himself slept, sprawled among his odalisques and chamberlains. Thus, when Sirius sank westward, not a soul in Umayas remained awake to see the coming of Namira. By late morning, Zotula stirred, heavy with wine, to the sound of frightened voices. His eunuchs and women babbled of a prodigy in the night. Still dazed, he understood little, until his favored concubine, Obexa, led him to the eastern portico. From there he beheld the marvel. The palace of Umayos stood alone at the heart of the city, its gardens stretching north, west, and south in fountains and palms. But to the east, where the common ground had lain empty the night before, a colossal edifice now loomed. Its domes, pale as fungus, rose to rival those of Zotula's own palace. Its walls were carved from death-white marble, its vast facade striped with night-black onyx and porphyry, red as dragon's blood. Zotula cursed aloud, calling upon the gods and devils of Zilak in blasphemous rage. His women shrieked in terror, his courtiers gathered in confusion, and the fat eunuchs quivered in their cloth of gold like monstrous jellies in golden bowls. Yet Zotula, remembering his crown, strove to mask his fear, and with a trembling voice declared, "Who dares," thundered Zotula, "to creep into Umayas like a jackal in the night, and raise his blasphemous den within sight of my palace? Go, learn the intruder's name, and before you go, bid the headsman whet his double-handed sword." Terrified of their master's wrath, the chamberlains obeyed. Reluctantly, they crossed the square toward the strange edifice. At first the portals seemed deserted, but as they drew near, a figure emerged upon the threshold. A skeleton, towering higher than any mortal man, striding forward with steps as long as spears. Its bones gleamed white in the sun, yet it was no mere relic of death. A scarlet loincloth clung to its frame, fastened with a jet-black buckle. Upon its skull sat a vast turban, starred with diamonds, its folds brushing the lintel above. From its hollow sockets burned eyes like swamp fire, and between its teeth lolled a blackened tongue, shriveled and foul, as if torn from a corpse long dead. The chamberlains froze, trembling. Only the creak of their golden girdles and the rustle of their silks betrayed their terror. The skeleton's foot bones clicked sharply on the onyx pavement as it halted. Then the withered tongue quivered, and in a voice thick with corruption, it spoke. "Return. Tell Emperor Zotula that Nemerhira, seer and magician, has come to dwell beside him." The chamberlains recoiled. To hear a skeleton speak was horror enough, but to hear the name of Nemerhira was like the tolling of a death bell over a fallen city. Panic seized them. With ungainly haste, they fled back to their master, bearing the dreadful message. When Zotula learned who had dared to build beside his palace, his fury guttered out like a weak flame smothered by night. The wine flush drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale, his lips mumbling broken prayers or curses, and the name of Nemira spread through palace and city like a flight of carrion birds, leaving behind a stench of terror that clung to Ummas ever after. For Nemira's sorceries and the monstrous beings that served him had made him a power no mortal sovereign dared oppose. Men feared him as they feared the vast, shadowy lords of hell and the gulfs beyond the stars. Whispers said he had ridden the desert wind from Tassoon with his underlings, like pestilence itself, and in a single night raised his mansion beside Zotula's halls with the aid of devils. Some swore its foundations rested on the adamantine vault of hell, its floors opening into pits where nether flames burned, or where stars could be glimpsed in the abyss of night. His followers, it was said, were the dead of forgotten kingdoms, demons of sky and earth, and obscene hybrids born of forbidden unions. Men shunned the place. In Zotula's palace, few dared even glance from windows that faced it. The emperor himself feigned indifference, though his harem whispered endlessly of Nemira and his concubines. The sorcerer was never seen, though some believed he walked abroad unseen, cloaked in invisibility. His servants, too, were hidden, yet at times the city heard their presence, a howling like the damned, a laughter like stone statues mocking eternity, or a brittled chuckling like ice breaking in a frozen hell. Shadows moved where no light fell, and at dusk red lights blinked in his windows like the eyes of demons. And so the ember-colored suns sank into distant seas, and the ashen moons fell nightly into the abyss. Seeing that Nemira wrought no open harm, the people grew bold again. Zotula returned to his wine and his feasts, drowning in luxury. But all knew, though none dared speak it, that the true master of Xylac was not Zotula, but Thazadon, prince of corruption, enthroned through his servant Nemira. Hidden within the walls of the house his demons had raised, Nemira sat unseen by mortal eyes, weaving again and again the black web of vengeance. The insult once dealt to Narthos by Zotula was but a single thread in that vast tapestry of cruelty the emperor had long forgotten. When Zotula's fears had dulled, and his women gossiped less of the sorcerer next door, a new terror came. One evening, as the emperor feasted with his courtiers, a sound arose, like 1,000 iron-shod hooves trampling through the palace gardens. The drunken courtiers heard it too, and their laughter faltered. Angered, Zotula sent guards to uncover the cause. But when they peered into the moonlit lawns, they saw nothing, only the thunder of invisible stallions galloping to and fro, their phantom charge shaking the night. Fear seized the guards, and they dared not step further. They returned trembling to their master. Zotula, sobered by their tale, strode out in blustering defiance. All night he stood upon his balcony, while the unseen herd raged below. Hooves clattered on onyx pavement, thudded across grass and flowers. Palm fronds bent as if parted by racing steeds, lilies and exotic blossoms crushed beneath their phantom weight. Rage and terror warred in Zutula's heart as he watched his rarest gardens laid to ruin. Behind him, women, courtiers, and eunuchs cowered, sleepless, until at last, just before dawn, the spectral tumult faded, retreating towards Nemira's house. At sunrise, Zutula walked the grounds with his guards. Everywhere the lawns bore the marks of trampling hooves, blackened as if scorched by fire. The tracks of a vast cavalcade scarred the gardens, yet at the boundary they ended. Before Nemira's house, the turf lay untouched, as though no hoof had ever passed.
"A curse upon Nemira, if this be his doing," roared Zutula. "What harm have I ever done him? By my throne I shall set my heel upon his neck. The torture wheel shall grind him, as these hell-born steeds have ground my lilies of Sotar, my blood-veined irises of Nott, my orchids of Eucastrog, purple as the bruises of love. Though he be viceroy of Thacedon and master of 10,000 devils, my wheel shall break him, white-hot with fire, until he shrivels black as seared blossoms." So the emperor boasted, yet he gave no order, and no man dared stir toward Nemira's house. From the sorcerer's portals came no sign, no sound. The day waned. Night rose beneath a moon rimmed with shadow. Zutula lingered at his banquet table, draining cup after cup, muttering threats into his wine. The hours crept by, and it seemed the phantom visitation would not return. But at midnight, deep in drunken slumber beside Obexa, Zutula was wrenched awake by a monstrous clamor. Hooves, iron-shod and countless, thundered through the palace porticos, along the balconies, echoing dreadfully in the vaulted stone. All night the spectral steeds raged, their gallop shaking the palace. Zutula and Obexa clung to each other in terror, while courtiers, eunuchs, and women cowered in their chambers, none daring to rise. Just before dawn, the tumult ceased. By day the marks were plain. The marble floors of porches and balconies were seared with countless hoofprints, deep graven and black as if branded by flame. Zutula's cheeks were mottled like veined marble when he beheld them. From that hour terror clung to him, even in his drunkenness, for he knew not when the haunting would end. His women whispered of flight, and the revels of the palace grew dim, as though shadowed by unseen wings. The wine lost its golden fire, the lamps their aureate glow. And again at midnight the hooves returned, this time galloping across the palace roof, pacing through every corridor and hall. Till dawn they clattered, ringing hollowly upon the domes, as if the coursers of the gods themselves had descended, trampling from heaven to heaven in a tumultuous cavalcade.
Zutula and Obexa lay together, yet found no solace in each other's arms. Beyond their chamber, the terrible hooves thundered back and forth, filling the halls with dread. In the gray hour before dawn, a deafening crash shook the barred brazen door, like the rearing strike of some colossal stallion. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the tumult ceased, leaving behind a silence heavy as the pause before a storm of doom. When daylight came, the marks were everywhere. The bright mosaics of the halls were scarred, the golden-threaded rugs and scarlet tapestries burned through with blackened holes. Even the lofty domes bore pitted scars, as though eaten by a pox of fire. And on Zutula's own chamber door, high above the floor, the deep imprints of a horse's forefeet were branded into the bronze. This tale of the haunting spread swiftly through Umaus and across all Xylac. Some whispered it was Nemira's doing, a sign of his supremacy over kings and emperors alike. Others claimed it was the work of a rival sorcerer from distant Tenoroth, seeking to usurp Namira's dread renown. The priests of Xylac, jealous for their gods, declared it a divine warning, demanding greater sacrifice in the temples. In his hall of audience, where the sard and jasper floor was pocked by phantom hooves, Zotula summoned priests, magicians, and soothsayers. He demanded they reveal the cause of the sending and devise a means of exorcism, but they quarreled among themselves, offering no answer. So Zotula, impatient, gave each sect the means to sacrifice to their gods and dismissed them. The wizards and prophets, however, he did not release. Under threat of the headsman's blade, they were commanded to go forth into Namira's mansion and learn his will, if indeed the haunting was his work. Reluctant, trembling, they obeyed. One by one, driven on by the emperor's swordsmen, they crossed the threshold of that devil-built house and vanished within. Before sunset, they returned pale, muttering, distraught like men who had glimpsed the very pit of hell, and they brought with them Namira's message, spoken with courtesy, but heavy with menace.
"Let it be known to Emperor Zotula," came the message, "that the haunting is but a sign, a reminder of that which he has long forgotten. Its meaning shall be revealed at the hour decreed by destiny, and that hour draws near. For Namira summons the emperor and all his court to a great feast on the morrow." The delegation, pale and shaken, begged leave to depart. Zotula pressed them with questions, but they gave only vague, contradictory answers, as if each had seen a different vision within the sorcerer's house. At last he dismissed them. Alone, he brooded long over the invitation, an invitation he dared not accept, yet feared to refuse. That night he drank more deeply than ever, sinking into a Lethean slumber. No phantom hooves disturbed the palace, and before dawn the prophets and magicians slipped away from Umaios like furtive shadows, vanishing into distant lands, never to return. Meanwhile, in his own mansion, Namira sat alone. He had dismissed his familiars, and before him loomed the black altar of Jet. Upon it towered the statue of Thassadon, wrought in ancient days by a demon-haunted sculptor for the tyrant Farnak of Tassoon. The archfiend was carved as a warrior in full armor, a spiked mace raised high, an eternal menace. Long had the idol lain buried in the desert ruins of Farnak's sunken palace, until Namira, by his dark divinations, had found it and raised it up to dwell with him forever. 7 silver lamps hung before the image, each shaped like a horse's skull. From their hollow sockets leapt flames of shifting hues, blue, crimson, violet, casting wild, lurid light. Shadows writhed across the demon's face beneath its crested helm, changing endlessly, never still. Namira sat in his serpent-carven chair, his brow furrowed deep. He had asked a boon of Thassadon, and the fiend, speaking through the statue's mouth, had denied him. Pride swelled in the sorcerer's heart, rebellion burning in his veins. He deemed himself no mere servant, but a sovereign among sorcerers, a prince in his own right among the lords of hell. And so, after long silence, he lifted his voice again, bold, imperious, as one who speaks not to a master, but to an equal.
From the black idol came a voice of stone, echoing through the 7 skull-shaped lamps.
"I have aided you in all things, Nemirha. At your call, the worms of fire and darkness have risen like an army. At your summons, the wings of nether genii have blotted out the sun. But in this vengeance you seek, I will not stand with you. Zotula has done me no wrong. Unwittingly, he has served me well, and the people of Xylac, through their corruption, are among my most faithful worshippers. Forget the old wrong done to the beggar boy Narthos. Destiny works in hidden ways. Had Zotula's horse not trampled you, your life would have been otherwise. You would still be a nameless beggar in Umos, unknown to men and gods alike. You would never have found Ufalok, nor risen to power, and I, Thesidon, would have lost the greatest necromancer ever to bind himself to my service. Think well, Nemirha, for in truth we both owe Zotula a debt of gratitude. Nemirha's eyes burned with implacable fire. Aye, there is a debt, and tomorrow I shall pay it in full. There are powers who will aid me, powers who will answer my call, even against your will. The idol's voice rumbled after a long silence. It is folly to affront me, and it is perilous to summon those you speak of. Yet I see your intent is fixed. You are proud, stubborn, vengeful. Do as you will, but blame me not for what follows. The hall fell silent. The lamps guttered with shifting hues, shadows crawling across the demon's face and across Nemirha's own. Toward midnight the sorcerer rose. He climbed the spiral stairs of his mansion to a high dome, where a single round window opened upon the constellations. By his sorcery the stair seemed to descend rather than rise, so that at the mast step he looked down into a gulf of stars. Kneeling, he pressed a hidden spring. The window slid open without sound. Lying prone, his beard trailing stiffly into the abyss, Nemirha whispered a rune older than mankind. And in that moment, voices answered, voices not of hell, nor of earth, air, water, or flame. They belonged to beings more dreadful than demons, more alien than gods. The air curdled with their breath, and frost gathered on Nemirha's beard as they leaned close from the void. There, defying Thesidon himself, Nemirha sealed his pact with the nameless powers beyond.
Slow and reluctant was Zotula's waking from his wine. Even before his eyes opened, the thought of Nemira's invitation poisoned the day. Turning to Obexa, he muttered, "Who is this wizard dog, that I should obey his summons like some beggar called in from the street?" Obexa, golden-skinned and sly-eyed, regarded him with subtlety. "O Zotula, it is yours to accept or refuse as you will. For the Lord of Umos and all Xylac, it is a small matter whether to go or stay. None can impugn your sovereignty. Yet would it not be well to go?" For though she feared the sorcerer, Obexa's curiosity burned. She longed to see the devil-built house, and to behold with her own eyes the dread Nemira, whose face was still but legend in Umos. "There is something in what you say," Zotula admitted. "But an emperor must weigh the public good. Matters of state are not for women to judge." Later that morning, after a heavy breakfast and much wine, Zotula summoned his chamberlains and courtiers. Some counseled him to ignore the invitation. Others urged acceptance, lest worse than phantom hooves befall the palace and the city. Then Zotula called the priesthoods of Xylac into his hall of audience. The wizards and soothsayers he sought were gone, vanished in the night. But the priests came in greater number than before, crowding the chamber till the foremost pressed against the dais and the hindmost were crushed against the pillars. There Zotula debated the matter of Nemira's summons. And the priests, eager to exalt their gods, declared that the wizard's invitation bore no threat. Surely, they said, it promised an oracle, one that would confirm their holy wisdom and prove the divine hand behind the hauntings. Thus they proclaimed the gods of Xylac would be glorified anew. The priests, heavy with offerings, departed with oily blessings upon Zotula and his house. The day waned, the sun sliding westward over the desert plains beyond Amaus. Still the emperor wavered, irresolute. He called for his wine-bearers, demanding the strongest vintages, but in the bottom of his cups he found no certainty, no decision. Toward mid-afternoon, a tumult rose at the palace gates, an uproar of terror, shrill cries of women and eunuchs, deep wailings of men. The clamor spread like wildfire through the halls. Rousing himself from his stupor, Zotula was about to send attendants to learn the cause, when the cause entered of its own accord. Into the hall filed a procession of mummies, tall and regal, clad in rotting cerements of purple and scarlet, gold crowns gleaming upon their withered skulls. Behind them came their attendants, giant skeletons, each girded in neckarat orange, their skulls crowned with living serpents of black and saffron that coiled and hissed as headdresses. The mummies bowed low before the emperor, their sear voices rasping like wind through tombs. "We, who were kings of Tassoon in ages past, are sent as a guard of honor for Emperor Zotula, to attend him as is fitting when he goes forth to the feast of Namira." Then the skeletons spoke, their teeth clicking like castanets, their voices whistling like air through broken ivory. "We, who were giant warriors of a race forgotten, are sent also by Namira, that the emperor's household may be guarded from all peril, and may go forth in pageantry befitting his majesty." At this spectacle, Zotula's attendants cowered behind pillars, wine-bearers trembling at the foot of the dais, and Zotula himself, his eyes swimming in bloodshot whites, his face bloated and ghastly pale, sat frozen on his throne, unable to speak a single word in answer to the ministers of Namira. The mummies stepped forward, their voices dry as dust. "All is prepared. The feast awaits Emperor Zotula." As they spoke, their cerements stirred and parted at the chest. From the hollowed cavities of their hearts, small rodent things, brown as tar, with eyes like burning rubies, crept forth. They reared up like vermin from their holes, and in shrill, uncanny speech repeated the words of their masters. The skeletons took up the chant in turn, their teeth clattering like castanets. The black and saffron serpents coiled about their skulls hissed the refrain. And lastly, from behind the ribs of the skeletons, where strange furry creatures crouched like prisoners in cages of bone, came a baleful rumbling echo of the same dread sentence. Like a dreamer compelled by nightmare, Zotula rose from his throne. The mummies closed around him in solemn escort. From the folds of their orange loincloths, the skeletons drew forth archaic flutes pierced with curious runes. They raised them to their lipless mouths, and a music began, sweet yet evil, a deathly piping that filled the palace halls. The sound was a spell. One by one, chamberlains, women, eunuchs, guards, even the clerks and scullions were drawn from their hiding places, moving like sleepwalkers. Enchanted, they fell into procession behind Zotula, marshaled by the fluting of the dead.
It was a strange and terrible sight. The Emperor of Zyalak led forth in the slanting sunlight, surrounded by a cortege of ancient kings, while skeletons piped their eldritch music. At his side walked Obexa, her beauty pale with dread, compelled as he was by the same inescapable horror. Behind them trailed the women of the harem, their faces frozen in terror. At last, they came to the portals of Namira's house. There, crimson-wattled guardians, half man, half dragon, bowed low, sweeping their bloody wattles across the onyx pavement like monstrous besoms. Between them passed Zotula and Obexa, followed by the mummies, the skeletons, and the thrall-bound court. They entered a hall vast beyond reckoning. The timid daylight faltered at the threshold, drowned in the arrogant blaze of 1,000 lamps. Zotula, even in his horror, marveled, for the chamber seemed endless. Avenues of topless pillars stretching into shadow, tables laden with impossible feasts, urns of wine overflowing, all receding into a luminous distance that dissolved into a gloom as deep as starless night.
Through the vast hall, Namira's familiars moved ceaselessly, a living pageant of nightmare. Cadaverous kings in rotted brocades, worms writhing in their hollow eyes, poured blood-dark wine into cups carved from unicorn horn. Lamias with trident tails and chimeras with 4 breasts bore steaming platters aloft in their brazen claws. Dog-headed devils, tongues of fire lolling, rushed forward to usher the guests. Before Zotula and Obexa appeared a monstrosity, its lower half the fleshed hips and thighs of a great black woman, its upper half the bare bones of some titanic ape. It led them onward, deeper into that infernal cavern of light and shadow, until at last they reached the far end of the chamber. There, apart from all others, sat Namira. Behind him burned the 7 horse-skull lamps, their flames restless and unholy. At his right hand loomed the mailed black image of Thessadon, towering from its altar of jet. Beside it, a diamond mirror gleamed coldly, upheld by the claws of iron basilisks. Namira rose to greet them with a courtesy solemn as a funeral rite. His eyes were bleak and star-cold, hollowed by dreadful vigils. His lips were a pale red seal on a parchment of doom. His beard, oiled and banded, hung stiff across his vermilion robe like a nest of black serpents. Zotula felt his blood congeal, thickening in his veins like ice. Obexa, lowering her gaze, trembled before the aura of horror that clung to Namira as regality clings to a king. But even in her fear, a woman's curiosity stirred, wondering what manner of man he was in his dealings with women. "I bid you welcome, O Zotula," said Namira, his voice tolling like a hidden funeral bell, "to such hospitality as is mine to offer. Be seated at my table." A chair of ebony awaited Zotula, set opposite the sorcerer. At his left, a lesser seat had been placed for Obexa. They sat, and Zotula saw that his courtiers and women were likewise seated at other tables throughout the hall, attended by Namira's monstrous servants, who moved among them like demons ministering to the damned.
Zotula's hand trembled as a crystal cup was filled before him. The hand that poured was dark, corpse-like, and bore the imperial signet ring of Zyalak, the fire opal gleaming from the mouth of a golden bat. It was the very ring Zotula himself wore. Turning, he beheld the figure at his side. It was the likeness of his father, Pithaim, bloated and purpled with the venom of the adder that had slain him. Zetula, who had ordered that serpent placed in his father's bed, shrank back in guilty terror. Yet the thing, corpse or conjured image, moved with dreadful precision, serving him with black, swollen fingers that never faltered. Its bulging eyes stared blindly, its purple lips locked in silence. From its sleeve, the spotted adder slid forth at intervals, its cold gaze fixed upon the emperor as it leaned close to pour his wine. Through the mist of fear, Zetula glimpsed another horror, a shadowy armored figure, like the living twin of Thasadon's grim statue, attending Nemira himself. And beside Obexha, a dreadful ministrant hovered, a flayed, eyeless corpse, in the image of her first lover, the boy from Sintram. She had once hidden him in secret for her pleasure, then betrayed him to the torturers, delighting in his agonies. Now he returned, stripped of flesh, to serve her in silence. "Drink," said Nemira, raising a goblet of wine dark as the sunsets of lost years. Zetula and Obexha obeyed. The liquid slid cold into their veins, not warming, but chilling, creeping upward toward the hemlock, toward the heart. "Verily, it is a good wine," Nemira intoned, his voice tolling like a funeral bell. "A fitting draught to seal our acquaintance. It was buried long ago with the royal dead, in jasper urns shaped for funerals. My ghouls unearthed it, digging in Tassoon." Zetula's tongue froze in his mouth, stiff as a root in winter frost. No reply would come.
"Prithee, taste this meat," said Nemira, his voice tolling like a hidden bell. "It is most rare, the flesh of a boar pastured by the torturers of Ukastrog, on the minced leavings of their wheels and racks. My cooks have steeped it in the balsams of the tomb, and stuffed it with the hearts of adders and the tongues of black cobras." Zetula sat mute, his lips frozen. Even Obexa, bold in her cruelty, was struck silent, haunted by the flayed phantom of her betrayed lover, whose presence revealed the necromancer's knowledge of her secret sin. To her, this was a darker sorcery than all else. Nemira's cold eyes gleamed. "Perhaps the meat lacks savor, and the wine no longer warms. Then let us quicken the feast with music." He uttered a word unknown to mortal tongues. It rolled through the hall as if 1,000 voices echoed it in unison. At once the singers appeared. She-ghouls, their bodies shaven, their legs hairy, their yellow tusks curved with shreds of carrion, their mouths grinning like hyenas. Behind them came the musicians, devils mounted on the hindquarters of sable stallions, plucked lyres strung with the sinews of cannibals, their fingers those of white apes. Satyrs, pied and leering, blew upon hautboys, fashioned from the bosom skin of slain queens and the horns of rhinoceroses. They bowed grotesquely before Nemira, then began their performance. The she-ghouls howled, a dolorous carrion-stinking chorus like jackals at a corpse. The satyrs and devils played a lament that moaned like desert winds through ruined harems. Zetula shivered. The music froze his marrow, and the howling hollowed his heart. In its echoes he heard the fall of empires, the trampling of centuries beneath iron hooves. He heard the sift of sand across dead gardens, the rustle of rotted silks on couches long abandoned, the hiss of serpents coiled in shattered columns. The glory of Umaus seemed to wither before him, blown away like dust in the simum.
When the last note died, Namira's lips curved faintly. A brave tune, yet I fear my entertainment wearies you. Therefore, let my dancers dance.
Namira lifted his hand and traced an enigmatic sign in the air. At once, a pallid mist descended from the high vaults, veiling the hall like a fallen curtain. From beyond it came muffled cries, a babble of voices, faint and far, as if echoing from another world. Then the vapor rolled away. The laden tables were gone. In their place, Zotila beheld his own household, chamberlains, eunuchs, courtiers, odalisques, all trussed with thongs upon the floor like gaudy birds bound for slaughter. Above them, to the rhythm of necromantic flutes and lyres, skeletons pirouetted with clicking toe bones. Mummies bowed stiffly in grotesque reverence. Other creatures of Namira leapt and capered in a saraband of evil. With every step, the dancers grew taller, heavier, mummies swelling to the stature of giants, skeletons towering like colossal effigies of bone. The music swelled, drowning the faint cries of the captives. The dancers loomed higher still, their thunderous feet shaking the columns until those beneath them were crushed like grapes beneath the press. The floor ran red with a ghastly vintage. Zotila, drowning in terror as in a night-bound fen, heard Namira's voice. "It would seem my dancers do not please you. Then let me show you a spectacle more royal still. Arise and follow, for such a vision requires an empire for its stage." Like sleepwalkers, Zotila and Aubex rose. Without a backward glance at the horrors behind them, they followed Namira past the altar of Tassadon, up the winding stairs, until they emerged upon a vast balcony. From there, they looked across the roofs of Umos toward the west. The day was dying. The sun had fallen behind the imperial palace, and the heavens were barred with bloody rays. "Behold," said Namira, uttering a strange word that rang through the stone like the toll of a gong.
The balcony lurched, and Zotila, peering over the balustrade, saw the roofs of Omaos sink beneath him. Higher and higher they soared, until the domes of his own palace, the fields, the desert, and the sun itself seemed far below. The chill breath of the upper heavens struck him, and dizziness seized his brain. Then Namira spoke a word, and the ascent ceased. "Look well," said the necromancer, his arms outstretched toward the dying sun, "upon the empire that was yours, but shall be yours no longer." He cried aloud 12 forbidden names, and then the dread invocation, "Gna padambis devompra thungis puridor avoragomon." At once the horizon blackened. Vast thunderclouds rose, but these were no clouds. They took the shapes of colossal stallions, their heads and limbs monstrous, their bodies towering like mountains. With a terrible rearing, they stamped out the sun as if it were a dying ember. Then, racing like titans in some infernal hippodrome, they charged toward Omaos. The earth shook beneath their coming. Their shadows swept for leagues across the desert, their hooves falling like avalanches upon distant towns and oases. The world itself seemed to tilt beneath their weight. Zotila stood frozen, marble with terror, as his empire crumbled before his eyes. The stallions drew nearer, their speed inconceivable, their thunder drowning all sound. Orchards, fields, and villages vanished beneath their trampling hoofs. Their shadows climbed over Omaos like an eclipse of doom. Looking upward, Zotila saw their eyes, vast, blazing, baleful, glaring down from halfway between earth and heaven. and above the thunder, Namira's voice rang in mad triumph. "Behold, Sotula, I have summoned the coursers of Themagorgos, Lord of the Abyss. They shall trample your empire as your palfrey once trampled a beggar boy beneath its hooves. And know this, I, Namira, was that boy." His eyes blazed with a madness of glory and ruin, burning like malignant stars at their zenith. To Zotula, dazed and broken with terror, Namira's words were no more than shrill overtones, shrieking above the tempest of doom. He understood nothing, save the horror. Then the hooves descended. Roofs split apart, walls crumbled like sand, and mighty temples fell as if crushed by the fists of gods. Domes were smashed like fragile shells, proud mansions stamped into the earth like gourds beneath a giant's heel. House by house, Umaos was flattened, the ruin crashing like worlds collapsing into chaos. In the darkened streets below, men and camels fled like ants, but none escaped. The hooves rose and fell, implacable, until half the city was rubble and night itself seemed to descend. Zotula's palace was ground beneath them, and now the colossal forelegs of the coursers loomed level with Namira's balcony, their heads towering into the heavens. It seemed they would trample even the necromancer's house, but at the last they parted to left and right. A dolorous gleam of sunset broke through, and the stallions thundered eastward, crushing the remaining quarters of Umaos beneath their mountain-sized hooves. Zotula, Obexa, and Namira looked down upon the city's fragments, scattered like shards upon a midden, while the cataclysmic thunder of the coursers rolled away toward eastern Xylac. "Now that was a goodly spectacle," said Namira, his voice thick with malice. Then, turning to the emperor, he added, "But think not that I have done with thee. Doom is not yet complete." The balcony sank back to its former height, still high above the ruins. Namira seized Zotula by the arm and drew him inward, Obexa following in silence. The emperor's heart was crushed beneath despair, as if a foul incubus rode his shoulders in a land of endless night. He did not know that at the chamber's threshold he had been parted from Obexa. Namira's creatures, shadow-like, noiseless, had seized her, dragging her downward through the stairways. Her cries were stifled by their rotting cerements as they bore her away into the dark.
The chamber was one of Namira's most unhallowed sanctuaries, where he wrought his direst rites and alchemies. The lamps burned with a saffron-red glow, like the ichor of devils spilled upon the floor, their light flowing over crucibles, black athanors in alembics whose purposes no mortal tongue could name. At the heart of this sorcery, Namira heated a dark liquid that shimmered with star-cold lights. It bubbled, exhaling a spiral vapor, and he distilled it into goblets of iron rimmed with gold. One he pressed into Zotula's hand, the other he kept for himself. "I bid thee drink," he commanded, his voice sharp as a blade. Zotula hesitated, fearing poison, but Namira's gaze was lethal, and with a cry, "Fearest thou to do as I?" he raised his own goblet and drank. Compelled, as if by the hand of death itself, Zotula followed. Darkness fell upon his senses, yet before it closed, he saw Namira drain his cup as well. Agony tore through him. It seemed he died. His soul slipped free, and he beheld the chamber once more, yet now with bodiless eyes. His body lay prone upon the floor beside Namira's, the goblets fallen between them. Then a strange thing occurred. His own body stirred, rising to its feet, while Namira's remained still as death. Zotula beheld his own form, clad in azure samite sewn with black pearls and balas rubies, yet the eyes that looked out were not his. They burned with a darker fire, a deeper evil. And though he had no ears, Zotula heard the voice of his own body, the voice of Nemira, strong, arrogant, imperious. "Follow me, O houseless phantom, and do in all things as I command." Like a shadow without substance, Zotula obeyed. Together they descended the stairs to the great banquet hall. There before the altar of Thassadon, the mailed idol loomed, the 7 horse-skull lamps burning as before. At its feet lay Obexa, bound with thongs, her beauty profaned as an offering. Beyond, the vast hall was empty, save for the aftermath of doom, the dark pools of blood that had gathered among the columns, the fruit of the trampling.
Nemira, wearing the Emperor's body as his own, halted before the black idol of Thassadon. He turned to Zotula's disembodied spirit and commanded, "Be imprisoned in this image, without power to stir or free thyself." At once, Zotula's soul was bound within the statue. He felt the cold, colossal armor close about him like a sarcophagus of iron. And through the bleak, carven eyes of the idol he gazed helplessly upon the scene. There he beheld the horror, his own body, now possessed by Nemira, transformed. Beneath the azure cloak, its legs had become the hindquarters of a black stallion, hooves glowing red with infernal fire. Even as Zotula watched, the hooves blazed white-hot, fumes rising from the stone beneath their tread. The hybrid abomination strode haughtily towards Obexa, leaving smoking footprints in its wake. She lay bound upon the altar, her eyes wide with frozen terror. The creature raised one incandescent hoof and pressed it down upon her bosom between the jeweled cups of gold filigree. Her scream tore the chamber like the cry of a soul newly damned, while the hoof glared with intolerable brilliance, as if fresh from the furnaces where demon weapons are forged. And in that moment, within the crushed and cowed shade of Zotula's spirit, something awoke. The manhood that had slumbered through his reign of wine and wantonness flared at last. Wrath and abhorrence surged within him, and he longed mightily for his own right arm, for a sword in his hand. Then a voice spoke within him, chill, bleak, and terrible, as if the statue itself had uttered it. "I am Thassadon, Lord of the 7 hells beneath the earth, and the 7 times 7 hells of man's heart above the earth. For this moment, Zotula, my power is thine, for the sake of a mutual vengeance. Be one with the statue that bears my likeness, even as soul is one with flesh. Behold, in thy hand is a mace of adamant. Lift it high and smite."
Zotula felt a vast power surge within him, his limbs swelling with giant strength that thrilled to his will. In his mailed hand he gripped the haft of a spiked mace, so huge no mortal man could lift it, yet to him it seemed but a fitting weight. Raising it high like a warrior in battle, he struck down with a single crashing blow the abomination that wore his rightful flesh, grafted with the hooves of a demon curser. The thing collapsed, its skull bursting upon the jet floor, brain matter spreading like pulp. Its legs twitched once, then lay still. The hooves, once blazing white with infernal fire, dimmed slowly to the dull redness of cooling iron. For a moment silence reigned, broken only by the shrill screams of Obexa, mad with terror and pain at the horrors she had witnessed. Then, within Zotula's soul, the chill voice of Thassadon spoke again. "Go free, for there is nothing more for thee to do." And so the Emperor's spirit passed from the idol, dissolving into the vast air, finding at last the freedom of nothingness and oblivion. But Nemira's end was not yet. His arrogant soul, torn from Zotula's body by the blow, returned darkly, not as he had planned, to his own flesh, lying in the chamber of forbidden rites. There he awoke, his mind clouded, his memory broken beneath the curse of Thosadon. Only one thing remained clear, a malignant, unquenchable hunger for revenge. Its cause and its object were shadows, but the animus drove him on. He rose, girding to his side an enchanted sword, its hilt blazing with runic sapphires and opals. Down the stair he descended once more, until he stood again before the altar of Thosadon. The mailed statue loomed impassive, its mace forever poised. And below it, upon the altar, lay the double sacrifice, Obeksa bound in terror, and the ruin of Zotula's flesh.
A veil of darkness clouded Namira's senses. He saw not the stallion-legged horror lying dead, with hooves cooling to black, nor did he hear the faint moans of Obeksa, still alive upon the altar. His gaze was drawn instead to the diamond mirror, upheld in the claws of iron basilisks. There he beheld a face he no longer knew as his own. Shadowed eyes, a mind webbed with delusion. He mistook the visage for that of Emperor Zotula. Hatred flared within him, insatiable as hell's own flame. With a cry he drew his enchanted sword and struck at the reflection. Madness shifted in him like a storm. Now he thought himself as Zotula battling the necromancer, now Namira smiting the emperor, now a nameless soul at war with a nameless foe. Blow after blow he rained upon the glass, but the sorceress blade, though tempered with dire spells, shattered close to the hilt. The mirror stood unbroken. Howling, he raised the ruined weapon, hammering with the jeweled hilt, shrieking half-forgotten runes of a curse too mighty for his fractured memory. The sapphires and opals cracked, falling in fragments at his feet. On the altar, Obeksa, dying, delirious, beheld the spectacle. Her terror broke into mad laughter, pealing like bells of ruined crystal through the hall. And above her laughter, above Namira's curses, came a deeper sound, the thunder of Hooves, vast and inexorable. The coursers of Thamagorgos returned, storming gulfward through Xylac. Their trampling shook the world as they came once more to Umaos, this time to crush the one house they had spared.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.